Welcome to the Not in the Job Description podcast. I'm Scott McLaughlin.
And I'm Chris Kiernan.
No matter what type of job you've had, there were situations that happened to you during work that you couldn't wait to tell your friends about.
We interview a variety of guests about some of their crazy stories from work, from entry-level food service industry jobs to doctors and attorneys. We will explore funny, gross, embarrassing, scary, and sometimes almost unbelievable stories that people have experienced while on the job.
Keep in mind that our guests or the companies they work for may be masked in order to protect the innocent, or maybe even the guilty. On today's episode, we talk to Steve, who is a pilot in the U.S. Air Force. Welcome, Steve.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm good.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, how you doing?
So I'm really excited to have you here because we already had one episode where we talked to somebody who was in the Marines, and I think there's always great stories. You can't imagine when you get a bunch of either teenagers or people in their early 20s all together at the same time, there's just going to be some madness. So I'm excited to hear some stories. I was wondering, Steve, if you would just tell us, how did you even get involved in this? I know when I was in high school, I was so rudderless. The idea of even, going towards the military didn't even come up. I was too immature for it. But how did you even start into this direction for your career?
Well, my father was in the reserves and kind of steered me to join as an enlisted member. And I was a reservist through college.
Okay.
And it was back, I'm pretty old now, so it was back a long time ago. One of the funny things about being in the reserves back then was in the late 70s, long hair was still kind of cool.
Right.
And it was a big commit to shave all your hair off.
I've seen stripes. Yeah, I'm aware.
Right. And after that happened and you let it grow out a little bit and you were only attending drill weekends, as they're called, once a month, people started buying short hair wigs.
That's funny.
You might find that hard to believe, but it is true.
Did yours fit too tight, or was it
was
okay?
Snug. It was snug. And in fact, I have been reminded of a couple of pictures that my sister
That's
dug
awesome.
up of me in my short hair wig.
Lucky for you, this is audio and not a visual
Yeah.
show.
I thought we were going
sad
to
now.
do the video shoot. No, okay.
Well, it looks like we'll know what to put on the cover of this one as soon as I can contact
Yeah.
your sister and get that picture.
No, she doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, okay.
We've taken care of that.
Okay. All right.
But so that's what I did in college. And then my father asked me, so have you ever thought about like being an officer and flying? I liked airplanes. I thought that sounded cool. So, that's how college kids think.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, I did all the application testing and physicals and amazingly got accepted.
So, when you get this and you take the test and everything, how heavy are those tests? Like what kind of things are they looking for? Because they're looking for someone who's engineering minded, or is there anything in particular they're looking for that?
I think there was several elements, but one of them was intelligence. Again, hard to believe, but
And they accepted you.
they
Interesting.
did.
Okay.
There's some hand-eye coordination testing that's done,
Okay.
and that's kind of changed in the last few decades.
Yeah.
The way it's done, but it was a whole wide range of things. We actually interpreted maps from 30,000 feet,
Yeah.
which is something that, none of us that took the test had ever done before. It was long. It was several days, and then there were the physical tests as well.
Yeah. Well, I know there was a time early in my life where I had graduated college and I applied for the FBI, and I was surprised they wanted pilots. I mean, they were looking specifically for people that had piloting skills, so strike one. And I took the test and I was so happy that I passed, but they let me go immediately. Turns out if you're colorblind, the Bureau of Investigation doesn't really think that maybe you can tell a good story. So I can kind of see where they were coming from. But when you're in school for this, you did this through the military, right?
So the testing or the UPT, the pilot training?
You tell me.
Yeah. So after I got accepted, there's a process where you have to go to a officer trainings, and they polish off the sharp edges and make you an officer.
Okay.
And then you queue up to go to pilot school. And that's a 1 year long process for the Air Force. And actually all of our services, it's about a year long.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty big commitment again. And, once you go there, it's eye-opening because the Air Force has about 3 ways they teach. It's called fear, sarcasm, and ridicule.
Okay.
Those are the methods by which they teach people. It actually is pretty effective.
Yeah, that'll hit pretty much everybody.
It does. It does. I got the only female instructor pilot,
Okay.
Ms. Dean, 112 pounds.
God, I hope she used sarcasm. Go on.
She was good. I felt even smaller. One of our first flights in the first training airplane, we're all nervous. I'm nervous. You're sitting in this jet beside her and this tiny woman, and I'm trying to hold the brakes as we run the engines up, and the airplane is kind of lurching forward. She said, "For God's sake, stand on the brakes, man." And so she gets on the brakes and we don't move anymore. I don't know. It's magic, whatever. So yeah, that was my first week or two at UPT.
So, when I'm thinking about this, naturally they're not like, okay, let's get the $1 million planes out for all the new hires. I'm sure they started on something. What was it? Crop dusters or something? What kind of plane? I don't know if you know the exact model, but what kind of plane did they start you out with when you were in that school?
We flew 2 different jet trainers, and the first one is fairly old. I mean, it was old then. That was one of my first impressions. And you think about getting into a new car or something that's, high value. You get into these airplanes, you always have to step on the seats, first of all, to get all the way into the cockpit. But every single surface that had any previous paint on it was worn down to a polish. It looked like the steps to the New York Library everywhere. And you think, oh my God, we're going to fly in that? I mean, it looks so old.
Right.
But it's maintained, daily by maintenance crews.
And so you had never flown before, though, right? Before pilot school, is that?
That's not true. I had about 50 hours, and I had just gotten my private pilot's license. That's one of the things that's helpful to get accepted.
Okay. I was going to ask if that helped you or hindered you, because it's a different type of flying from a little Cessna to some beat up old jet.
Yeah, it is. And to say it's a beat up old jet, again, that's what it visually looked like. It flew a lot faster. We talk in the flying business about staying ahead of the airplane. And so as you're driving your car, you teach young kids how to drive. They kind of look right in front of the dash or right in front of the grill of the car, and it's getting your eyes out to look further down the runway or in front of you. But like the airplane starts to move really fast, and you end up, you're going 200 knots, and you're still back thinking, wow, that was an exciting takeoff or whatever. And it's a transition.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, and when I think about roughly how old were you when this was going on?
Yeah, so I was 22.
Okay. At 22 years old, and we talked to the person from the Marines, Phil, there was so much hijinks and stupid stuff going on. But the worst Phil had come out of it with was somebody pulled a pin on a grenade, threw it, it didn't make it in the hole, and they were all lucky to escape. But, I mean, you guys are in airplanes. Is there much kind of goofy stuff that happens, at least early on in that pilot training?
Yeah, there's some hijinks, sure. This is hard to believe, and I never did it. But the second airplane we flew was quite a bit faster, much more modern, and it was a supersonic jet trainer. And there was a thing called the Clamshell Club, and we, again, this is clear back in the very, very early 80s, and we used grease pencils, if you're familiar with what that is or not. And you would write down things that were important on the inside of the windscreen. To join the Clamshell Club, you had to take your airplane out, and we flew in between 20 and 35,000 feet in these blocks for training, and point it vertically until the airspeed bled off to the point that you could actually open the clamshell-shaped canopy and put a mark on the outside. That didn't sound too appealing to me, and I never joined. But I do know of 2 people who did. I mean, probably the worst thing that would happen is you lose your canopy and be in a world of trouble and survive and come back.
Or be picked up somewhere.
Yeah. We did have 2 people die in training. And
Not from that stunt,
not
right?
from that stuff,
Okay.
but from a nighttime accident. And nobody ever knows exactly still. We
Yeah.
didn't have cockpit voice recorders in those airplanes. And so it was kind of a sobering moment. They required everybody to go out to see
Sure.
the crash site.
No, I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
You're
Very
still dealing with
instructional.
people in their early 20s. Everybody kind of feels invincible. I'm sure seeing that, and especially if it's somebody that was in front of you and you've talked to them before, that had to hit home pretty hard.
Yeah, it was. It was sobering. And then they collect up all of the debris in all aircraft accidents and reconstruct it from photographs in a hangar. And I just remember seeing the heel of a boot. And that's
Ooh.
one of the things that still sticks with me seeing
Yeah.
that.
And I imagine that was probably a pivotal moment in your training where it's like, okay, this is something that's more serious than I thought it was before. Again, when I was 22, I don't even know exactly what I was doing, but I'm sure it was not very consequential. Like if I messed up, somebody's burger was wrong. I don't know what I was doing, but that's a lot of responsibility for younger people.
Well, yeah. And I have to say, actually, about 3 to 4 weeks in, you start out doing some non-flying things. They teach you how to land with a parachute. So you go through a lot of training that kind of makes it feel real. They hold you behind a Jeep with kind of like a parasail. Up to about 1,000 feet. And, and you're supposed to drop off the rope. And this is out in West Texas. And I
So
felt
there's
like
nothing hard on the ground out there, right?
No. I felt like I was Marlon Perkins, and that really dates me. But you remember the Wild Kingdom, and you got the helicopter following him in the Jeep. That's exactly what it looked like. It was nothing grows more than about 4 feet high out there, and there was just dust everywhere. And so I'm settling back to the earth, and I'm thinking, all I have to do to die is pull these 2 clips down, pull the rings out, and I'm going to plummet to earth. It is one of those moments that sticks in my head a little bit. But
yeah. Unlike Marlon Perkins, you didn't have Jim to reach out and save you.
no. That very day, we had a few foreign nationals that trained with us, and we had a couple of, I think they might have been Ethiopians. And one boy was very, very slight, less than Captain Dean at 112 pounds. And we had to call our training because of winds, and he was the last guy to go. And he, in fact, landed and got pulled across the desert for a good 100 yards or more.
Oh, wow.
And he came back all dusty covered, and his English was okay, but I'm sure he was swearing in Ethiopian because he didn't look too good.
He's still telling that story.
Yeah, he probably
God willing.
is.
Yeah, he's probably still telling that story. So once you get through pilot training, I mean, what happens after that?
So there's one funny thing that I really want to tell you that I've thought of probably 2 or 3 times a year, just because it was one of those moments.
Yeah.
I took a flight with our squadron commander, and he was old. He must have been 32.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was a captain. And I thought, oh my gosh, I hope I don't mess up with this guy. So this was the first training airplane. And we did a thing called spins. I don't know if you've ever heard of an airplane spinning, but you may have heard of an airplane stalling.
Yeah.
So a stall is when the wind no longer supports the lift on the wings, and the nose will fall down until you pick up airspeed. Well, we practice spins where you do the same thing, but you intentionally cause the airplane to spin and not fly. So it kind of flutters like a leaf and rotating.
Now, wait a second. I've seen enough movies to know that sometimes this is the death knell for jets.
Mav, we're in a flat spin.
I remembered something like that. Yeah.
Right. It is, but this airplane was designed to be recoverable from a spin. And so it's one of those things that they train you to basically master the airplane. So we're doing spin training. And again, it was fairly early in my training. And the captain wanted to do an inverted spin in the spin recovery. And I'd never done that either. He said, oh, it's fine. So you can imagine being inverted.
Yeah.
And going on a kind of a merry-go-round and earth sky.
Yeah, I'm about to vomit right now.
Exactly. And there was a procedure for that. And while he demonstrated it the first time, he's singing Abracadabra by Steve Miliband.
You had to feel like this was your last day on the earth.
It was surreal because I'm, white knuckled
Yeah.
because this is so unusual to see this. And he's humming Abracadabra
Like it's nothing.
like it's nothing. And so that actually gave me a little calming moment. And we were able to finish the flight. And I did an inverted spin with him. So,
And you've never listened to the 80s channel
No.
since then?
no,
If you were to hear that song, it'd probably immediately come back to you,
it
wouldn't it?
does.
God, I hope you're not driving when you hear that song.
No.
So you end up going through this training.
Yeah.
Like, what is the transition? So now you've finished training. What happens next?
So the next thing is they send you to a formal survival school. And by formal, I mean it's long. That's what I mean by formal.
I thought you meant they just put you in a tux out in the middle of the.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's-
the part two of it. Yeah.
It did seem to come out that way. And it's broken into two parts. One is how to survive a variety of situations, and the other is how to cope with being a prisoner. I won't get into too many details of that. I had the opportunity to be imprisoned for 2 days, and that was more than enough to never want to be
Sure.
in any kind of a prison. But
Yeah.
it was a great experience. It was done in the northwest part of the country, and learned a whole lot of interesting things, and lost 7 pounds in 6 days on a
Wow.
little adventure that we incorporated in to the end of the formal training.
Now, I don't want to talk bad about anybody in the military because I'm a big supporter of the military, but a lot of my friends are around my age and they talk about going to different types of survival school. And I've heard some of them talk about what's happening today in survival school. And I just have one question for you, Steve. Did you ever have a timeout button you could hit when you were feeling kind of bad?
Actually, there was one word or one phrase, and we weren't supposed to be able to use it. It was called academic situation. But nowadays, it's probably a little softer. I mean, I saw guys get punched, hoses sprayed on people, and spend time in little boxes.
Sure.
So I bet it's a little different, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that people understand if you are caught behind enemy lines, there's a good chance that the stuff that you're experiencing in training will be the least of what you might experience by an actual enemy, depending on who it is.
Yeah.
So it's probably good to have that kind of background. But I've heard some pretty funny stories about people saying, he yelled at me and I don't think that's appropriate, or, my captor didn't call me by my pronoun, or I don't know. There's all kinds of weird stuff that I've heard now that seem like they're getting a little softer.
Well, I can tell you just from my experience, right? I was in the Army Reserves, and this was early 90s. It had already started to transition a little bit. Like, in theory, the drill sergeants were not supposed to cuss at us or around us, but they did. I mean, and they told us point blank, I'm not supposed to be cussing at you privates, but F that, just start pushing, right? I mean, they didn't care. So, but that was early 90s. I can only imagine, 20, 30 years later that it's probably gotten even a little softer. You hate to say it, but.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. So you go through the school. Are you then moved into a certain unit, or do you have to request to fly a certain type of plane?
So what is done is the Air Force at the end of flight school has a thing called a drop. And that's the exciting time in which you find which airplane you're going to fly.
Okay.
And it's usually based on at least two things. One, how you performed in the program, and the needs of the Air Force. So I went to, actually turned out to be a very, very fantastic opportunity, the airplane that I flew. It was a C-130.
Okay. Those are
If you've
big,
ever-
right?
They're big.
Yeah.
They're not the biggest. One way to think of it is it's like having the best SUV. A Land Rover, I don't know what the best is,
Right.
but something that's got extreme durability, can do amazing things in a lot of different venues. And so I didn't really think of that at the time, but I came to love that airplane and the things that it could do. It took me everywhere in the world. I've been in North and South America, Asia, Africa, the Middle East. everywhere.
So if you had to guess how many hours you had flown, or
Yeah,
do you even know?
I do. I've got a little over 5,000 hours. I didn't fly quite as much as some people. I had some other duties and other jobs, but
Yeah. That crop dusting job you had on the side.
right.
Well, that's awesome. But that plane is also when I think about anything, right? And I'm a big car guy, but the larger you get, the more kind of cumbersome you are. But it's also sometimes a little bit more stable of a ride. I mean, there's give and take for everything. How was this 130? I mean, was it easy to fly? Was it, is it? Did you fly other planes that you're saying, well, I'm glad this is a better fit for me?
Well, the Air Force spends a lot of money to train people. So I had to go to 4 months of training to learn to fly the 130. So they're usually pretty reluctant, to bounce you around unless you're
Okay.
in a certain skill set of test pilots or other things like that. But no, the airplane was fairly easy to fly. What was great about it is, as large as it is, you could land it actually on dirt surfaces, grass surfaces. We landed in soccer fields on
Wow.
occasion in South America. I was involved in the Somali feed situation back in 91? No. Yeah.
You're in the ballpark, yeah.
Hard to believe. That
Yeah.
was a bit ago. And we landed, out in the horrible Somali desert areas.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was what was nice about it. And you could, people that flew fighters, great. It was pretty fast and pretty cool. But, you always went to one place. You did one thing. We did all kinds of things. We dropped paratroopers. We dropped cargo. We landed and unloaded cargo. So
Yeah, I'm sure you got to go different places. Anybody in a fighter jet, you know exactly where they're taking off from and roughly where they're landing every single time. So there's not a lot of stops in between.
yeah.
I heard they put you in that 130 because you couldn't open a canopy. Is that true?
That very well could be.
Okay, it's just the research I do on the side.
You're good. You're good. The cockpit of that airplane is very large. It's really unusual because you can reach clear across, and it's very difficult to slap the co-pilot.
Oh, that's the other reason I heard they put
We have
you
to
in
have
that.
have to have a stick or something to actually hit the guy.
I love going to air shows and seeing different types of airplanes out there. And a lot of times, they'll have some modern stuff. Well, and what's to say what's modern? I mean, some of these planes will fly for 50 years, but, you'll get some of these planes from World War II. There's not a spacious cabin in there. Those guys were like knee to knee.
Right.
So I can't imagine if any of the pilots from World War II got to walk onto some of the planes now. Can you imagine them shaking their heads?
Right. No, the redundant systems. And in fact, it's one of the things I wanted to tell you that you might find humorous. We have a flush toilet
Oh, wow.
on that airplane, even though it's designed to carry, grunts and Army guys. And one night actually, coming back from Europe, when I was still just a co-pilot in the airplane, didn't have that many hours, our squadron commander was in the back. And we had a lot of our passengers, our own maintenance people and intel people, and it was a pretty full airplane. And he had left, and I was not in the front seat at the time because we were on a deployment. So there were many crew members just sitting back there.
Mm-hmm.
And our colonel was taking a number 2. And
Because he could, right?
because he could. And it was quite a luxury, on an 8-hour flight after wherever we'd been. And there's a little, it's on the very back of the airplane, and there's a ramp that makes up the aft end of the airplane on the inside. So you have to walk up, 6 or so short steps to get to where the lavatory is.
Yeah.
And it folds down, and there's a little curtain that you can pull around yourself for some privacy.
Oh, I have to admit, when you said it had a flushable toilet, I'm thinking bathroom. This is still just a curtain.
Oh, yes.
Okay, all right. Curtain with
Don't think airliner
a fold
yet.
down. Gotcha. Please continue.
But it actually did remove the duty.
Nice.
To make this story quicker, in the front end, we had an engine that was malfunctioning, and they had to shut it down. And when you shut an engine down on this airplane, there's initially a lot of yaw, and that means the nose swings. And when the nose swings, the tail swings. And because the tail swung as hard as it did, and our dear colonel wasn't on any headset, he didn't know anything about what was going on, the next thing you see is this curtain flailing, and he hits the ramp with his flight suit rolled up around his ankles, rolls about 4 feet down this ramp, and in front of everybody watching, has to get up and pull his gear back together.
How does he recover from this, man? All you have to do is pull it up and, go have a seat.
He went on to become the wing commander. Maybe it's a badge of honor. I don't know.
That might be on his resume. I'd put that on mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, survived that.
Survived the embarrassment.
Oh, my gosh.
So that was a pretty, hundreds of funny things happened. We used to carry Army guys, okay? And Army guys usually didn't really enjoy the flight either. We don't have windows. We don't have flight attendants. We just have 2 loadmasters. And
a flushable toilet in the back. Don't write that
sell
off.
it too short. And the standard instructions is sit down, shut up, keep your feet off the seats. That's about it. And so on one flight, we have a little kitchen in the front of the airplane. I say a kitchen, kind of like I say there's a flush toilet.
Right.
It's a box that you can heat things in. And one of the loadmasters, that's the guy who's in charge of the back of the airplane, had a can of vegetable soup. And he heated up some vegetable soup. And this was, as it turns out, an old joke we would play. I didn't play it, but the rear end guys did.
Yeah.
So they take a vomit bag, and unbeknownst to the Army guys in the back, they take this warm can of vegetable soup, tie it up in a puke bag, seal it off, and they, again, Army guys aren't on any headset. It's noisy in there. They tapped the first guy on the shoulder and said, "This is a bag of puke. Send it back to the loadmaster in the rear." So these guys are carrying, hand by hand, this warm bag of vegetable soup. Yeah. Which just seems counterproductive because inevitably the goal is to get somebody to puke. But guess who gets to clean that up?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right. That's not well thought through.
No, not well thought through at all.
I thought you were going to say by the time it got to the back, he would open it up and start eating it and just to mess with
He
them.
stole my punchline. That's exactly what they did.
Okay.
And if they hadn't puked yet, they did.
That'll do it. Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh, that's funny. Now, you talk about, having an engine go out and things like that. And we discussed that some of these planes are old. I mean, we've still got, B-52s flying from World War II. I mean, we've got a lot of old stuff. But to your point earlier, it's maintained every day. Did you had to, just because you're dealing with something mechanical, you had to have some close calls or some scary moments, right?
I had a few, yeah. In terms of aircraft malfunctions,
yeah,
actually not very many, but a few. One of the things we always worried about that never happened, and I told you we dropped cargo.
Yeah.
We have this great big giant 28-foot diameter parachute that is launched into the slipstream behind the airplane, and it yanks the load out of the back of the airplane. Well, one of the things that could happen is as the load is coming out, and it comes out with quite a bit of force, as you can imagine, is that it jams somehow.
And there's the back of your plane gone.
Yeah. And so that was probably the biggest thing that we worried about. I had one that lodged for half a second. As soon as that chute fills, as you're dropping, you feel like you've slammed on the brakes in a car.
Yeah.
You fall forward on your straps, and then immediately it's like a rubber band was released. You go,
yeah,
and you snap backwards. Well, we never got the snap backwards part. And the procedure is that you lower the flaps because you're going to get slow really soon. Apply all the power you can, and then the loadmaster has to go behind this load and cut the parachute free. So before that all happened, in the millisecond, probably more like 3/4 of a second, what had lodged became dislodged, and the load exited the airplane. But
hopefully it was before
yes,
the guy got behind it.
He had not moved yet.
Okay.
That's a procedure that's going to take a few seconds. This
Yeah.
happened in less than one. But everybody was about to clean out their pants.
Oh,
because
yeah.
That's a holy shit moment right there.
Absolutely.
One of the worst things that happened is kind of self-induced. We nearly stumbled into Iran.
It happens.
Yeah.
So how did you nearly stumble into Iran?
Well, I'll set this up. It's night. We're in the Gulf War, and we'd just kind of taken over the whole part of Iraq, and there wasn't much infrastructure, like no radar, a little bit of weather. So there's a big thunderstorm.
You better not tell me Sally the Navigator just wasn't paying attention.
Well, it was that time of the month. As we say, another empty kitchen.
So let me just express and say he's retired. So
Steve's not his real name.
You're stumbling into possibly Iran. How does this happen?
So the way airplanes know where they are in modern times is with ground signals. And as we took over the country, those were all destroyed. The other way is with some sort of a radar, some tracking method on board the airplane. So we had multiple, usually when things happen, bad things happen, it's because we've had multiple failures.
Right.
In some way. And so that was the case here. We had a really unexpected line of thunderstorms. It was completely unfamiliar. It was the first time we'd made this route all the way up to the northern part of Iraq. And if you remember maybe the way the geography lays, on the right-hand side, the east side of Iraq, there's this diamond shape that juts in. Well, that's where Iran lives. And we were coming up the right-hand side, the east side, and there was a right-hand turn, in the flight plan. But I had a brand new navigator, brand new as in he'd never been deployed nor had flown very much. And
wow.
Yeah. And he had a piece of equipment fail that was the ground tracking portion, and he was embarrassed to tell me.
Oh, this sounds like the beginning of a movie. Please continue.
At the same time, the co-pilot had to go to the back of the airplane, not to use that wonderful flush toilet,
right.
but he had a duty to perform to load a particular type of secure secret radio.
Okay.
And so the thunderstorm is intensifying, and we're right beside it, and it's blowing us rapidly to the east. I don't realize that I'm not getting good navigational guidance. The navigator's a little reluctant to say anything about it. It's pitch black, and there's lightning flashing. And the next thing I hear is, American airplane approaching Iranian border, you must turn back now. And we look at each other. What? Did you hear that?
Were you like, is somebody screwing with us?
I said, actually, we said, man, who's that for? And, the loadmaster actually was the guy, because there's always a lot of stuff going on, and good loadmasters don't have as much visual stuff attacking them like we do in the cockpit. So he said, was that us? Was that for us? I said, I don't know.
The thought didn't occur to you?
It didn't at the moment. About 5 seconds later, American aircraft approaching Iranian border, you must turn back now. It's exactly what it sounded like. And then my asshole puckered right up. I thought, oh, shit. So I thought maybe our nav equipment, in terms of like headings north, east, and west,
right.
I got my flashlight out and looked at what's called the whiskey compass, the wet compass. It's the only one that's not affected by electro stuff.
Yeah,
I thought maybe, who knew? But it said we were headed north. And then the radio came again. And I said, oh, F it. We got to turn. And so I turned west.
Yeah, turn left.
Right into the thunderstorm. Lightning jumping around. And we're bouncing around. And I'm still not sure, because we're still turning away from Iran, and he's yelling at us again. And we just get through this thunderstorm. I mean, it was not that wide, but it was very violent.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to fly in thunderstorms, but you're not supposed to fly in Iran either.
Yeah. I mean, you got to choose your evil there. Yeah.
And so the co-pilot finally makes his way back to the airplane, and he'd been thrown around quite a bit. He gets to sit down in the seat, and we hit another bounce, and he floats in the air, lands hard back in the seat. He puts his headset on and goes, what did I miss?
I hope you said, well, let me turn around and we'll replay it.
I said, you don't want to know. It was just a sequence of mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
If I had deviated to the other side of the line of thunderstorms, that wouldn't have happened. If the navigator had been more experienced,
Yeah.
if this piece of equipment hadn't failed, if the TACAN that the Air Force ground people were
Yeah.
setting up had been available.
That just goes to show you, even with all the redundancies,
Yeah.
it's any weird chain of events can just flush those right down the toilet.
Yep. Yeah,
So
I feel lucky.
you talked about, that was one of those scenarios. Something I think about when I get on a plane, because my father, who, for whatever reason, his luck was such that, most people that just fly, they'll never have an issue on an airplane, ever. He was on 2 that crash landed.
Oh, my.
So one was one of his friends had a small plane, and they went to get breakfast down in Florida. It sounded like it was like a really, big deal. And, I don't come from money or anything. So when his buddy from the Navy calls him and says, I'll come pick you up for breakfast and we'll go down to Florida, we thought, oh, look at him go. Well, I guess you still need brakes after you hit the ground. So they went right off the edge. I mean, nobody was really hurt. And then he was at Camp Grayling, Michigan one time and was on a plane that caught fire. And so they ended up just, landing, and he got off the plane. And my dad never, I don't think his heartbeat ever went over 50. So he just told the story like, yeah, so we all just got off of it and turned around, and those things burn really dark, and he wasn't really wigged out by it. And whenever we were, whenever my sister or I would get on a plane or something, he would say, there's a good chance that thing's going down. He would screw with us all the time. He just didn't care. But every time I get on a plane, I always think about, I watch enough of these airline shows to know that the biggest problems you're going to have are either on takeoff or on landing. So have you had any major issues or some scary moments around takeoffs or landings?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Takeoffs and landings, that's when the ground is the nearest, and that's the most dangerous time. But yeah, I've had a couple of engines that malfunctioned on takeoff, and you had to do something called an abort. It all worked fine, didn't have any problems. I did land and blew a tire one time. It blew up, and it swerved a little, but not terribly.
Was that caused just because the tire was worn, or were you carrying a lot of weight, or?
Well, this particular time, we were landing on a causeway, intentionally.
Okay.
Not an accident. It was a causeway in Kentucky. It was part of they called them assault strips, but they're landing zones that, of all things, it had been recently graded. We come to find out later, one huge rock that was sliced, and I actually landed.
Oh, congratulations.
Right on that rock. Right. It was a bullseye with no reward for the end of that. But, so we sat there with our airplane. They had to come fly. Actually, they drove a Jeep up and got us, and then they brought a tire back. Some other crew came and got the airplane and took it home. But yeah,
so you got to go, hey, everybody, the plane's out there. You're going to need to fix that tire. I'm going somewhere else.
You just call like tire discounters for that?
Yeah, right. They came out with a little light and jacked it right up.
So any other planes that you flew along with that, or was that pretty much, I know you said that that's what they did, but there's lots of variations of that airplane, right?
Yeah, we did get a newly built version of that airplane back in late 80s, early 90s. A lot of states were buying aircraft for the Air Force. It was kind of an era we went through. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we got to travel and go to so many places, I actually got to take a bath in Herman Goring's bathtub at a
wow.
German. Yeah, it was kind of a tourist trap. Really.
Yeah,
there was
sure.
A big line.
Did someone finally say, "Sir, you don't belong here"?
Your time's up. We had a trip coming back from Europe that was kind of exciting. Airplanes don't like turbulence, and passengers don't really.
Right.
And it's really not that true to say airplanes don't. Passengers are far more sensitive to it than airplanes, but there is a limit. And so we had to change the way in which we flew home, the route, instead of going over the Northern Atlantic from Scotland, we had to go clear up to Iceland, get gas, go clear over the top of middle of Greenland, and land in St. John's, Newfoundland. It was quite a trip. It was at night, as we always are.
Yeah.
Our favorite saying was, we get to some place about a half an hour after it's closed, and we leave about an hour after it opens, or before it opens. So we flew over Greenland, and I got to watch. It's just silence because there was nobody to talk to.
Yeah.
For 2 hours of brilliant green northern lights.
Oh,
It
that's
was
awesome.
unbelievable. And then you could just sit there and stare and watch these curtains
Yeah.
slowly around, knowing that at the end of this, we've got a landing that is going to be less than fun because the thing that made all this turbulence was a big storm. And so we're finally get to our landing destination. And you've probably seen little video clips of airplanes that land in crosswinds or
Yeah.
gusty winds. You know how exciting. Have you seen some of those?
Right. Yeah. Where they're practically sideways before they
Right,
hit the ground.
So we had about a 35 knot crosswind. Now, the only thing good about that is that it was fairly steady. It wasn't gusting. So we were doing that business that most people call crabbing,
Yeah.
where you have one wing down and you turn the nose with the rudder pedals. And the flight engineer is quickly trying to figure out, okay, are we within limits? Because there's a limit at which you
Yeah.
can't, land. And we're getting closer, and the winds are still getting stronger. And she was the flight engineer said, I don't, it's close. I can't, let me turn the light on here. It says, you know what? It doesn't matter. We're landing anyway. Because we didn't have any other real good options.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, it worked out. We landed. And as we parked the airplane, this also had an air carrier, like a commercial. And you've seen the little baggage carts that come out.
Sure.
They're hooked to each other.
Yeah.
So we finally got the airplane parked and stopped, and we looked out the front, and the wind is just howling. This baggage cart flips over on its side and skitters on its side across the front of the airplane. I think that we got in just in time is what I think.
Yeah. No kidding.
So,
Well, since you brought up turbulence, I have to ask this. I have determined some personal limitations in my life. I don't mind flying. Not like anybody loves turbulence, but I think it impacts me maybe a little bit more than other people. It will make me sick. I will never get on another boat again. Chris and I went out deep sea fishing one time in the Bahamas, and I don't remember much of it because I was just off the side, just throwing up for about 4 hours.
Yeah, it wasn't good. When he finally looked at me and he could barely talk, and he said, "Chris, I think I need to go back now. I can't feel my tongue."
Yeah, I was.
I finally
a mess.
told the guide, like, "Hey, man, we got to wrap this
Yeah.
fishing trip up."
It
He's
was
done.
an absolute mess for me. So whenever I think about people joining the Air Force, did you ever have any people that you knew that were like deathly air sick, but they're stuck in the Air Force?
So in flight school, one of the nicest guys that I met in the first few weeks there would get airsick when he flew, but he wanted to be in the Air Force. So they gave him a few more tries. And I remember one day, clear as the day it happened, we're walking back from the flight line. His flight had landed and mine had as well. You remember Goose and Mav coming back, right? But in this case, my friend has his flight glove and he's holding it up like this to me, and it's completely full
Oh no!
of his puke, and it's
Oh,
rolling
my
out his hand.
God.
So I thought, what a guy, he vomits in his flight glove and he still wants to go back and do it again.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, I know the planes that you are were not like fighter jets, but I've heard stories of people I know in the military that know somebody that somehow they get on one of these jets, and they implied that the pilots just made it a personal, I guess, badge of honor to make people puke
Or pass out.
or pass out. Have you heard of any of this, or have you heard of any of your fellow pilots in some of the larger planes try this nonsense?
Well, I don't think we could do that in the 130.
You
Or
couldn't
the
turn
big-
the 130 into the vomit comet? I mean,
You
if
might.
did-
You could. I guess you could, bounce somebody off the ceiling.
Yeah.
You wouldn't. Yeah. But I have heard that from the fighter guys. You take somebody up. They want to be as impressive as they can with
Right.
yanking and banking. as it's called.
That was Scott's favorite movie for a while.
That's right.
But you didn't like turbulence, right?
Oh God, no.
How do you feel about lightning?
Here's the funny thing. I was on a flight one time, and this is just how it works, right? I took a flight out somewhere, and it was just like floating in cotton. It was beautiful. On the way home, we have to stop in Indianapolis, which is like, 3-hour drive, less than an hour long flight. We get to Indianapolis, and it's starting to storm. And I'll never forget this as long as I live, because they couldn't find the pilot. And they were like, well, just hold on. We're going to be fine. We're going to find him. When they finally get the pilot, it looks like his parents dropped him off. I mean, he looked like he was 16 years old. So I'm with a bunch of people from work, and we're all kind of just looking at each other a little sideways. And they said, all right, the flight to Columbus is ready to go. So we get on this plane, and it's starting to, there's lightning. There's storms. We take off. Now, this is way before 9/11. So this is a small plane. I'll bet you there's not 20 seats on it. I mean, it's just a little hopper between two cities. We get up in the air, and there's just a curtain between the pilot and the co-pilot. And Doogie Howser, that they dropped off, so he could be the co-pilot, he was up there playing a Nintendo game with his foot up on the console. And the whole time, I can't, we're being bounced all over the place. I just want to throw up. And I look at my watch, and I'm like, it's been 45 minutes. And normally you're starting to land by now, from Indianapolis to Columbus. And he ends up telling us, hey, sorry, everybody, this storm's horrible. We've been flying backwards for like the past 20 minutes. It took us an hour and 45 minutes to fly from Indianapolis to Columbus. We almost could have driven it in that time. So there was lightning and things like that. I think I was just so scared, like, this is my purgatory. We're just going to be stuck up here. So I've seen lightning, but it hasn't been that close. What's your experience with lightning on a plane? Is that going to cause you issues? I would think that they get struck by lightning frequently.
They do. Like, they can, and generally, fortunately, it doesn't usually destroy an airplane. Some airplanes usually carry a lot of fuel have exploded, but it's not a common occurrence. But nonetheless, it's not a good thing to have happen. I was, again, on a deployment to the Middle East, and we were in Turkey, actually, at this time, in the middle of the night, as always, and we were descending. And you may not know this, but there's a particular area in which lightning is more prevalent. And have you ever heard of St. Elmo's Fire?
I love the movie. Thanks.
It is nice, isn't it? But it was named after something else. It's a phenomenon that occurs. You get static electricity buildup.
Okay.
And you'll see little balls of electricity rolling around on the windshield, or even sometimes inside the cockpit. It's strange.
Yeah.
And
But is it dangerous?
Well, it's not dangerous in and of itself, but it's a little warning. Hey guys, something bad's about to happen.
You're heating up.
Yeah. In fact, you can even, for us, when this happened to us, you could feel the hair stand up. So you've been around maybe that experience too.
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous amount of static electricity building up. And this all happens in about 5 or 6 seconds. So you don't have a lot of time to do much. Well, the next thing we knew, and there's 3 of us, and we're in the cockpit, airplane's empty. The loudest noise and the brightest light I've ever experienced occurred. And we got struck on the nose of the airplane by a lightning bolt. And for the next 10 to 15 seconds, neither of us could, or none of us, all 3 of us, could neither see nor hear anything. And, everybody's thinking, oh my God, is the airplane still there?
Right.
I'm not feeling any rain on my face, so I think we're intact, but our thoughts were, did we have anything electrical at all? And so you're waiting this interminable amount of time to get your hearing back.
Oh my gosh.
And, you've been flash blinded with things, even lights turned on in a room. And it was the brightest light I've ever seen. And Well, we died, actually.
When you woke up, it was 3 years later.
Right.
I've heard this before.
But no, again, this is the durability of modern aircraft, and turns out we put a pretty good sized hole in the radome, and it exited out the side of the aircraft behind the pilot. But everything was still functioning.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So it didn't mess up any of the electronics or anything. That's wild.
It is.
And you imagine your fall time from 30,000 feet to get your bearings. I mean, what'd you have, 3 or 4 minutes?
Yeah, we knew it wasn't going to be fun, whatever happened after that. But
no kidding.
it was again, another 15 seconds where your butthole was pretty puckered.
Well, thanks for explaining reason 586 why I didn't join the military. Well, Steve, thank you very much for taking this time to talk to us. This is the part of the episode where I'll ask Chris, what have we learned today?
Yeah, I learned that I forgot that Abracadabra was my favorite 80s song.
Oh, yeah, you'll never think of it the same way
Right,
again.
Exactly.
I think what I learned is if you see someone eating out of a vomit bag, it's probably vegetable soup. That's pretty much what it is. All right, great. Well, again, Steve, thank you very much for sharing with us. That about wraps up this episode. I'm Scott McLaughlin.
I'm Chris Kiernan.
And we're saying we'll see you at work.
Thank you for listening to the Not in the Job Description podcast. If you have a story you'd like to share, or if you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, please let us know by sending us an email with a brief description of your story to stories@notinthejob.com.